First of all, our engineering team, Dick Burden, Jerry Burnham, Carson Schreiber. And you can applaud. They were here yesterday working and getting everything tuned up. Our promotion and marketing team, Lois Travelina and Bianca Pino. Neither are here, but...
Oh, blippity blip.
Of course, our greeter and, I hesitate to say bouncer, Marcia Miner at the door. And then our video production team, Matthew Worley, right here, Johnny Kay, and then Don Kelson. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention our financial controller, Michael Brockman. And I'd also like to thank and acknowledge Christine Dunn from the Airtel Plaza Hotel. We've been working with her. There she is. Apparently she was out front directing traffic, and I said, God, I hope it's not raining. But she said it wasn't. But we've been in close touch for really several weeks about this event, and she was here most of yesterday, and then she's here early this morning just to make sure that this comes off without a hitch. Before we start, I also wanted to tell you that Steve Resnick is here, and he has a lot of memorabilia from Wink's career, stuff that goes back to KFWB, KHJ, KRLA, and this is original materials. This isn't pictures, but he'll have that stuff available afterwards for you to take a look at, and it's really pretty amazing. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our most capable host for today's event. Please join me in welcoming the current president of the Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters, Shotgun Tom Kelly.
Thank you so much, Chuck. And I must say, it is really great to be here. At the Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters, we always like to give you a little something extra. And this was a brainstorm of Chuck Street, and I just love it. They're just wonderful things that be held on a Saturday when a lot of us can come. Okay, let's get this thing started. As a matter of fact, we ought to get after it right now. First of all, let's welcome Wink Martindale.
Grazie, grazie, grazie.
Now, Wink, I got it. Did you say you wanted to do a little something before we got started?
Well, I'd be remiss, plus it's in my marriage contract, if I didn't introduce my wife. Most of you know her, but I always introduce Mrs. Wink Martindale, Ms. Wink Sandy. We just celebrated our 43rd anniversary this past August the 2nd. 43 years with her has not been that easy. But we always go to what used to be the Chart House in Malibu to celebrate our anniversary because that's where we had our first date. Now it's Mastro's on Pacific Coast Highway. And I wrote down a note here that happened during our dinner, so I'd get this right. I said, after we had enjoyed our cup of coffee and before we were leaving, I said, Sandy, just think, 43 years ago, we were living in a cheap apartment. I was driving a used Chevy. We slept on a hard sofa bed and watched a 10-inch black and white television. And back then, I was living with a 30-something. And today, we live in a lovely English Tudor home in Calabasas. And we each drive nice new automobiles. We sleep on a huge oversized bed and watch TV on a huge plasma screen television. But the difference, and this is where I made up, I screwed up. I said, but the difference is now I'm living with a 70-something. But I said, I still love you more than ever, but time changes everything, doesn't it? Well, it's the first time I'd ever heard her call me Buster. She said in no uncertain terms, well, Buster, that may be true, dear. But consider this, if you ever feel compelled to find yourself a new 30-something, you do that and I'll make damn sure that once again you'll be living in a cheap apartment, driving a beat-up Chevy, sleeping on a hard sofa bed and watching a 10-inch black and white television. Our wives really know how to get to the chase, don't they? That's my introduction. Thank you, Sandy, for living with me all these years.
Okay. Well, I think everybody, wants to get things started. You want to get after it? All right. One of the things that all of us in radio or any profession have done, we want to know how we got started. And I knew you knew even as a kid that you wanted to be on radio, right, Wink?
Yeah, from the time I was old enough to know what a microphone was. Somebody said, some wise sage once said a long time ago, if you can find a job you like, you will never have to work a day in your life. And they must have had me in mind, because I always wanted to be on radio. I got really interested in radio when I used to come home after grammar school and listen to soap operas with my mom. She would listen to Stella Dallas and When a Girl Marries and Lorenzo Jones and his wife Belle and all those afternoon soaps, and that really got me into it. And so she understood more than my dad or my siblings did about my love for radio and eventually television. And this little table right here in front of me is a table I made at Vacation Bible School when I was about, 7 or 8 years old. I made it for my mom. And later, she let me cut a hole in it. And I bought one of those cheap turntables, and I inserted it in there. And this is what I used to play radio for the first time in my life. I would spend all of my money. I was then a soda jerk at Baker's Drug Store in downtown Jackson, and I also carried a Jackson Sun paper route in the afternoon. But I'd spend all my money on 78 RPM records. And it was hard to turn this thing on and hold a 78 RPM without it sliding across, But I made it work. And my daughters knew this story, and my mother still had this, God bless her soul. And they were back there about 5 or 6 years ago visiting the old home place, and they found this. This was the crystal microphone that I sent off for, my very first microphone. And they had this attached, and they, unbeknownst to me, brought this back on the airplane. I don't know how they did it. And they fixed it all up, and they had it inscribed, "A symbol of humble beginnings, a young boy's dream realized and surpassed." And that is really what got me started in radio.
I love that. Well, we all grew up reading Life magazine, and there was a pictorial that taught a lot about how to sell a commercial on radio in the later years. Now, talk to us about that.
Well, my dad was a lumber inspector, and so you'll know up front, we didn't have a lot of money. We weren't poor, but what we didn't have, we didn't know we didn't have anyway, so it didn't matter, I knew that there were some people who lived across on the other side of town that had a hell of a lot more than we did, but we got by, and we always had clean clothes, and we always had 3 meals a day, so we were in good shape. And my dad, as a lumber inspector at a company called Wood Mosaic, every Christmas would get a $100 check. That was his bonus for Christmas. But in addition to that $100, they gave him a year's subscription to Life magazine. So I grew up reading Life magazine my entire life. And because of my interest in radio, I used to tear out the advertisements in Life magazine, and I'd go into the back bedroom of our little 3-bedroom house, close the door, and pretend I was on the radio. And I would take those pages of commercials, and I would pretend I was doing this on the radio. And so it helped me a lot because, to a degree, it helped me to ad-lib, and it helped me to hopefully sell a commercial. And nobody understood me doing that. They thought I was crazy, meaning my siblings. But my mom, who remembered this, she's the only one who really and truly understood. But that's the way I got started, reading Life magazine for my entire life.
Moms are beautiful.
Moms are good.
My mom was a radio fan, too. But now listen, let's talk about your first job. Your first job in radio was in 1951. That was 67 years ago. Now, do you remember the first day on the air? You were a 17-year-old kid. Tell us about that.
Well, as I said, I always wanted to be in radio. And my Sunday school teacher at Lambeth Memorial Methodist Church happened to be the manager of the 250 water in Jackson, WPLI. We had 3 stations, 250 water, 1,000 water, WTJS, and a 5,000 water, WDXI. And as it so happened, I'd moved from one station to the other before I went to Memphis. But I used to bug my Sunday school teacher. His name was Chick Wingate. And every time I'd see him, whether it was at church or anywhere I'd meet him on the street, Chick, when are you going to give me a job? I want to be on the radio. And he would just sort of fluff it off. But one night, you know, every little town has, Jackson was a town of about 25,000 people in those days, and every little town has its town home square. And I was sitting there on the railing of the First National Bank one summer night with Dickie Bear and Charlie Pate, who were 2 of my high school football buddies. And we were just talking, killing time. Must have been about 8:30 or 9 o'clock. And up pulls, remember, anybody in the room old enough to remember the old Henry J automobile? Well, Chick Wingate pulls up in his little Henry J. And this was my night, because the radio station was the 4th floor of that bank building, and he was coming to do some late night work. I said, Chick, as I said many times before, when are you going to give me it? He said, damn it, come on. Just to get rid of me, I guess. He took me upstairs, 4th floor, went into the radio station, ripped off some Associated Press Newswire copy and a couple of commercials, gave them to me, sat me in front of a microphone, and turned on the tape recorder. Little did he know that I had been practicing all these years with Life magazine. So I pretty much knocked him off his keister. I went through those commercials like Grant going through Richmond. And I've always been fond of my reading, and I've always thought I was a pretty good reader, so the news was no problem, and I kept up with the news. And so when it was over, he said, here's what you do. You come down here tomorrow after school. I was 17, graduating that year, 1951. He said, you come down here tomorrow after school. I'll have the mayor here. Mayor George Smith owned that radio station. He said, I'll have Mayor Smith here, and we'll do this for him. And if you are liked by the mayor and what he hears, you got a job. So I couldn't wait till the next day. And I got down to WPLI on the 4th floor of the First National Bank building quick as I possibly could. And I was on a bicycle. And I auditioned for the mayor. He loved what he heard. He hired me, gave me $25 a week, and that was my beginning in radio. And then while I was at WPLI, since I'd played football for the high school team, I was never first string. I was always second string quarterback, but I tried. And I knew all the players. And they said, how would you like to do some play-by-play? So I did play-by-play football and play-by-play basketball that year at WPLI, in addition to being a regular announcer, doing the news, and sweeping the place out at night. Whatever needed to be done, I did it. Well, after that first year, WTJS, the 1,000 water, came calling with $45 a week, and I went to WTJS. And that could have been almost the undoing of my radio career. Because one night on the air, I did the night shift. One night on the air on WTJS, I had read the 10 o'clock news and had flubbed it pretty well. And I got to 10:15, and we had those turntables where the commercials were on the big discs, and you played them at 33 1/3.
Yeah.
Well, I happened to play one at 78 RPM. It was a beer commercial. And the board was an RCA board where you first had to turn off your speaker and then turn on your mic. Well, I forgot to turn off the speaker or the microphone. And I said, God damn, what the shit's gonna happen next?
Oh, no!
It's exactly what I said. And then I realized what I had done. And at 10:30, when I hit the network with the show called Dream Harbor, I got one telephone call. It happened to be the executive secretary to the general manager and owner of the 5,000 watt station, WDXI. Her name was Ruth O'Neill. I don't know how I remember these names. Some days I can't remember my name. But Ruth O'Neill called and she said, sir, I answered the phone. She said, sir, you better tell that announcer that he's cursing on the air. I said, yes, ma'am, I sure will tell him. I sure will tell him. And I called the transmitter, because we had engineers at the transmitter in those days.
Yes.
And I said, did you hear? He said, I didn't. No, I didn't. He lied, but I didn't hear anything. Everything's fine. The only other person that I ever heard that heard me say that was my sister, Geraldine, Jerry, who had a date that night, and they were driving around, and they heard me say that. But outside of them, I never heard any more. I had heard about something called the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, and I knew essentially what they were and what they did. And I thought, this is it. I mean, I've wanted to be in radio all my life, and this is going to kill my career. But fortunately, even the management of the radio station never uttered one word about it. So I went from WTJS the following year to WDXI, and I was at the 5,000 watter and did the afternoon show and became really, that was my best job in local radio because all the kids in town knew me, and I did a 6:30 program from the black and white stores in Jackson. The black and white stores at your request. And they would call in requests on the telephone. Those were fun days on radio. Makes no sense today and wouldn't, but I got to do, and that was the most popular radio show in Jackson. So I got to do that, and I got to a point, and again, I was still doing play-by-play football and basketball at all three stations. And it got to the point where I wanted to move on to my dream job at my dream station.
Yes.
And that was WHBQ in Memphis. And I thought, how do I go about doing this? Well, one Sunday afternoon, I surreptitiously came to the radio station. And while nobody else was there except the announcer on duty, I did an audition for WHBQ, which I sent to Gordon Lawhead, the program director, thinking I probably would never hear anything. And it just so happened, I'm kind of like my wife, Sandy, I don't throw many things away. And I happened to have a few seconds of that audition.
Are we going to hear it?
You're going to hear it. And I tell you what, you're going to hear a guy trying to sound like a radio announcer. That's the way, you know. I thought you got to throw your voice down here. And that's when my voice was not nearly as low as it is now. I was trying to copy the style of my hero at WHBQ in the afternoon. He did a show called Covington's Corner, and he was a terrific guy with a great voice. His name was Dick Covington. And I tried to sound like him. And then, well, first of all, you'll hear me do a bit of a commercial. We'll play as much of this as I can take, and then we'll just cut it off. Okay?
This is Dixie, WDXI, Jackson, Tennessee. At Hudson's Radio and Record Shop, 308 East Lafayette Street in Jackson, you can choose from the complete line of the famous RCA Victor radios, records, record players, and television sets. See the new RCA Super Sets with new picture power that give unequal performance even under the roughest reception conditions. You get sharper picture detail, matchless golden throat tone system, a complete choice of beautiful cabinet styles, and when UHF is ready, your RCA Victor Super Set can easily be adapted. Remember, more people own RCA Victor than any other make.
This is me being Dick Covington.
Yay, hello there. How are you this fine, sunshiny afternoon? We got music for you for the next hour and a half. A little thing we call Dixie Platter Time. Every day at the same time we come on the airways real big. 2:30 it is, too. Records all at your request.
Okay, that's enough of that.
Yes,
Take
Rita
that.
Bombshell.
That's all I can take. I know I could. That probably would have gotten me a job at K-Earth 101. All right, Johnny?
Yeah. Well, listen, as bad as you may think that audition sounds to you today, it really did the trick for you because within 2 weeks, the WHBQ program director called you.
He did. Gordon Lawhead called me on the phone, and I was on the air that night, and he said, I want you to come over here. We want to have an interview with you about coming to work at WHBQ. This was only 2 weeks after me sending the thing in the mail. And I thought, my God, it was an out-of-body experience. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. Well, sure enough, my dad, I didn't have a car, my dad drove me over there. And I still remember the first time I walked through those doors at WHBQ. They were on the mezzanine floor at the Chiska Hotel in downtown Memphis, Tennessee, South Main Street. And I sat there waiting to be interviewed by my eventual mentor, Bill Grumbles, and the station manager, John Clegren. The station was owned by Harding College in Searcy, Arkansas. And so the general manager, John Clegren, was very religious oriented, which is no problem with that. But I did the interview, I got the job, and came back to Jackson, gave them 2 weeks' notice, and in 3 weeks, I was on the air doing Clock Watchers at WHBQ Radio.
And you even had your own theme.
Yeah. I remember when Pam's, remember Pam's?
Sure.
Down in Dallas. They went down there and had, that was in the days when stations were getting their individual jingles made. It was
Yeah.
new in those days,
Sure.
about, you know, the mid-'50s. And as part of the jingle package, they had themes made for all of the DJs. And mine, I was Winky Martindale, still Winky Martindale there. And this was my Clock Watchers theme song.
Well, let's listen.
Hi there, Winky. Here comes Wink Martindale on the Clock Watcher Show.
Well, you can't imagine, unless you're a young kid who's just getting into radio and you have your own theme song with your own name being sung. That was really something in 1954, 1955.
Now, within months of beginning Clock Watchers on radio, you got your first TV show, Wink Martindale of the Mars Patrol on WHBQ TV. And that had to be a real kick to have your own TV show.
Well, yeah, you know, I just wanted to be on the radio. And within a year, Channel 13, WHBQ TV, went on the air with their television station. And Mark Forrester, our program director, and Bill Grumbles, my mentor, came to me and said, we would like for you to do a television show for kids. And we'll call it Wink Martindale of the Mars Patrol. Would you like to do that? And I said, where do I sign? And so I went on the air doing this show with 6 little Mars guards every day. We had a set with seats made out of airplane seats, the metal seats.
Yeah.
And they were graduated up. And it looked like, hopefully it looked like a space set. And we would blast off after having our Bosco and milk, and we'd segue into the old, remember the old B movies and the Rocky Jones, Space Ranger?
Yeah.
We'd do about 5 minutes of that because we didn't have a lot of film on that. So we'd have to be very careful about how much we played. So we'd go into about 5 minutes of that, and then I'd come back and interview the kids again up until, you know, it was a 30-minute show. And they always left with a super beam signal ray, which I still have one on my wall at home. We'd give them all a super beam signal ray to take home with them. And interviewing kids, it's like Art Linkletter said, kids say the darndest things. And they really do. The only one that I remember that said something that kind of caught me off guard was, I need to go pee-pee. And I said, no problem. But I said, we can't stop. You just go over there, and we'll be here when you get back. But interviewing kids really is an education. It really taught me how to handle interviews to a degree better than I ever had before. But that was Wink Martindale of the Mars Patrol. And I was going to University of Memphis, which was Memphis State at the time. And I was already married with my first wife and had 2 kids. And I was taking 16 hours at Memphis State. I was doing the morning show and doing the afternoon show, Mars Patrol. And during that period of time, as you can imagine, I was pretty popular at Memphis State because I was on, quote, television. And I was so popular that, are you ready for this? They had a popularity contest for the sophomores that year, Mr. and Miss Fabulous. And I won the title of Mr. Fabulous. And Mr. Cleghorn, my general manager, I guess was sensing that my head was getting a little big for my body. I still have the letter that he sent me. It dated March 28th, 1955. Dear Winston, my real name, I make it a practice to congratulate other people when they receive an extraordinary honor. But if you don't mind taking advice from an old man, the secret of continuation of your popularity is to remember three things. One, if you want people to like you, you have to have a genuine love for the human race. Two, the only way to avoid arrogance that comes with outstanding success is to remember you are God's creature, and what you've achieved is due to Him, not your own accomplishments. If you can remain humble and a surrendered instrument in His hands, there's no limit to the good you can do. And third, he said, if you forget you're God's creature, you could fall a lot further and a lot faster than you can ever climb. It's a pleasure to have you on the station. Sincerely, John H. Cleghorn, General Manager, WHBQ.
Wow, I love
Isn't that
that
nice?
letter. Yeah.
And of course, you can imagine why I kept that all these years.
Well, listen, we're talking about the early 50s. That's a time when music was beginning to change in Memphis, and Memphis was the center of those changes. And you had a front row seat.
For sure.
Now talk to us about the infamous night in July 1954. Something happened that changed music like we've never known it. Things would never be the same. And Wink, you were there when it all happened, in person.
In the mornings on Clock Watchers, I was still playing Perry Como and Eddie Fisher and Joe Stafford and K-Star, Wheel of Fortune, things like that. At night, we had a wild man on the air from 9 to midnight. His name was Dewey Phillips. He's the guy in the picture back there, which John Ritchie asked me about a while ago. He's the guy on the left. Dewey Phillips was the first DJ to ever play an Elvis Presley record. He was playing in those days, and we're talking about 1953, 54, he was playing black music for white kids. Teenagers were just getting into the rhythm and blues category of music, more so than the vanilla music that we were playing in the morning that I mentioned earlier. Well, I happened to be at the radio station this particular hot summer night in July of 1954. I was showing some of my football-playing buddies from Jackson around the radio station, and I heard the commotion going on in Dewey Phillips' studio. It was around 9:15 because he came on at 9 o'clock. And I excused myself, and I went into the control room, and I said, Dewey, what's happening? The switchboard lit up. And Sam Phillips, founder of Sun Records, had walked in with an acetate that he had cut that afternoon. Wasn't even a record yet. It was just an acetate. And he wanted to, Dewey could test a record, and you could find out within one evening whether or not in Memphis that record was a hit or not. That was the power he had, because he had 65% of the audience at night. And he played That's All Right Mama by this truck driver named Elvis Presley. And he played it 7 times in a row. He just couldn't get enough of it. And Sam happened to have Gladys and Vernon's telephone number. They lived in low-rent housing in East Memphis called Lauderdale Courts. And he gave me the telephone number, and I was designated to call and find out where Elvis was, because Dewey wanted him to come to the radio station. So I got on the phone, Ms. Presley answered. They were listening to the radio, and they heard the excitement, and they were thrilled. I said, Mrs. Presley, where's Elvis? Dewey wants him to come down. And Mrs. Presley said, well, he was so nervous about his record being played, he went to see a double feature over at the Suzors on Decatur Street. He went to see a double feature Western. And he said, we'll get in our truck and we'll go get him and bring him down to WHBQ. So they walked up and down the dark aisles. Elvis was sitting in the middle of the theater all by himself watching this double feature. They whispered to him about the excitement. They snuck out of the theater, got into the truck, went down South Main Street, as Dewey used to call it, the magazine floor of the Chiska Hotel. And Elvis went in, sat down in front of a microphone, and Dewey said, I want to interview you. So he started talking to Elvis and asking him all the questions about his days at Humes High School and how he happened to make the record. And of course, Sam was in on that conversation too, Sam Phillips. And after the conversation was all over and Elvis was ready to leave, he said, well, Mr. Phillips, I thought you were going to interview me. And Dewey said, son, I just did. He had no idea that the microphone was open. And he said many times in later interviews and in many books, had he known that he was being interviewed live on the air, he wouldn't have been able to talk because he was so withdrawn in those days. So I met him that night. He became my friend and was my friend until the day he died. And That's All Right Mama, of course, went on to great popularity regionally and was later put out on RCA as part of the Sun Records chapter. And the following Thursday, they went in and recorded Blue Moon of Kentucky to go on the flip side. So in a week, the record was out, and it was a tremendous hit. He went on to do it on Louisiana Hayride, and that was the beginning of Presley Mania, a hot July night in 1954. And for whatever reason, God placed me there to be witness to this special night. And music was never the same, as you know, after that. And that's that story.
Oh, that's a beautiful story. Okay, yeah, really. All right, the year was 1956 when American Bandstand was very popular, and Wink, you were the Dick Clark of Memphis.
Well, every city had its Dick Clark in those days.
Well,
Because
yeah.
American Bandstand was so big,
Sure.
and every city had to have its dance party, and I happened to be the one.
And
in
you
Memphis.
did. You had your own version of Bandstand called Top 10 Dance Party. It was on Saturdays. And as Elvis was churning out hit after hit after hit, he came home to Memphis one summer after filming his first movie, Love Me Tender. And one of the first stops was on your dance party.
Yeah, it was the first time that Elvis had ever been interviewed when the interview was actually recorded. We did not have videotape in 1956 at Channel 13. So somebody suggested, this guy's getting so big, you should have a photographer come in and video this.
Yeah.
So a guy named Bob Zimmerman came in and set up his 16 millimeter camera right in front of the jukebox where I used to do my interviews, and that's what that picture's from back there. And I did a 25-minute interview with Elvis Presley, and he was already bigger than baked bread and getting bigger every day. And I had cue cards slapped all over the walls because I had so many questions I wanted to ask him. And in fact, at one point, I asked him a question, and he said, well, there's the answer on that card over there. You don't have to ask me. I said, Elvis. But we went on and finished that interview. I remember the funniest thing that came out of that interview. I said, Elvis, when you were going to Humes High School, did you have any idea that any of this was going to be happening to you? He said, Wink, I never expected to get out of Humes High School, which was true. And that interview was recorded. I loaned it out to a friend, the master copy, which is stupid, and I never got it back. But I got back a few segments of it. And I'm going to show you the last couple of minutes now of that interview with Elvis Presley in July of 1956 on Top 10 Dance Party. We're going to turn down the lights, I think.
All right. Love to see it.
No, I mean, there's a lot of stories started, but...
Well, now that brings us around to something else. And we're getting around to the end pretty soon here. Some people, and we discussed this the other day.
And about this Judy Spreckles, that I've been getting a lot of publicity with Judy Spreckles. I got started when Judy gave me a ring out in Las Vegas. She gave me this ring here, and what ring there?
It is a pretty big ring, isn't it? Would you show it to us close up there?
Sure.
It's pretty big and
Hurry up, I'll
beautiful
show you.
ring, too.
She gave me this. No, somebody started it, but she was wearing my ring and I was wearing her ring. And we were wearing each other's rings.
That's the way it goes. How about the big show at Rustwood Park scheduled for July 4th? Bob Johnson surely, I know, wants us to mention that, and we want to mention it. I believe the proceeds from this show go to the Cynthia Milk Fund. Is that right, Elvis?
Yes, sir, that's right. And I'd like to say let's see, what would I like to say? I'd like to say that we have a diamond ring that we're going to have as a door prize. It's my initial ring. I've had it for some time, and it has 14 diamonds in it. And we're going to give it away at the door as a door prize.
I see.
And everything.
And all the proceeds from this particular show, this is July 4th at Rustwood Park. Elvis is going to be there. He's going to sing and play. His band will be there. Many other stars will be there, too. And we will certainly want you to watch Bob Johnson's column in the Memphis Press Senator, watch all the publicity on it, and get your tickets in advance. Elvis Presley, I want to thank you again because we know you're a busy man, and thanks a lot for coming by and seeing us at the dance party and saying hello to all your friends here in Memphis and the Mid-South. And anytime you're in town and want to come by, we certainly will welcome you.
Well, thank you very much, Wink, and I'll see you again.
Okay, thanks a lot. Elvis Presley.
I always thought that was pretty funny. Anytime,
Look at that. I love that.
anytime you're in town, Elvis, feel free to come by. Of course, anytime. By the way, I failed to mention a while ago that of that first night when he was discovered, when Presley Mania started in '54, I'm the only living person of the 6 people in the control room that night who were there. Everybody else has passed on.
Oh, those were great early memories of the king of rock and roll. And just before this coffee with Wink, you came up to me, Wink, and you said, I want you to use this phrase. And it's one of Johnny Kay's favorite phrases, one of mine too. You had countless memories. Can you tell us about it?
I already laughed with Johnny about that.
Yeah, I'm laughing with Johnny.
This is something that I think you will enjoy. I just recorded this, and I won't say anything more about it. I'll just say that this will be on iTunes in the next month or so, along with The King Is Gone by Ronnie McDowell. It's called Heavenly Child.
Now, in March of 1959, you left Memphis for L.A. Now, as I recall from your book, by the way, and let me hold up that book right here. Here it is. It's available for sale today. So if anybody wants to pick up this book, you can do that. And will you sign it for the people who buy
No.
it today? Oh, okay. I didn't think so. Anyway.
Did he expect me to say no?
I led you into that. You and I know we've known each other too long. Anyway, we're having fun up here. But it is. Can you recall some memories out of that book that maybe you'd like to share?
Well, I remember in 1959 when I felt like I'd gone just about as far as I could go in Memphis in terms of my career. I went to my mentor, Bill Grumbles, sat down at his desk, and I was very nervous about this because he had hired me and had loved my work and was almost like a second father to me. And I said, Mr. Grumbles, I just feel like I'd like to spread my wings and move on to a larger market. Would you help me? And he couldn't have been nicer. He said, absolutely. RKO owned WHBQ, and they also owned KHJ in Los Angeles. They owned WOR in New York, among other stations. He said, you want to go to New York or L.A.? I said, well, New York kind of scares me. But I said, L.A., palm trees, sounds good. So he picked up the phone, and he called Norm Boggs, who ran KHJ TV, and he said, I got this young man in my office. He's been working with us for a long time, 7 years, and he's done a good job for us, and he'd love to come to L.A. Fade to black come up on, I was hired, and in March of 1959, I came out to L.A. But I remember when Bill Grumbles hung up the telephone, he had referred to Malibu in his conversation with Norm Boggs. And this redneck said, Mr. Grumbles, just one question. What is Malibu? I had no idea there was a Malibu, California, because I had never been out of Jackson except to go to Memphis and maybe St. Louis. But got on the plane, flew out with Mark Forrester, my program director, in March of '59. And I'll never forget flying into L.A., and all of you know this if you've flown into L.A. at night, and you see miles and miles and miles of lights. And I looked down and I thought, oh, my God. I turned to Mark, and I said, what if I don't make it and I have to go back with my tail between my legs? You know, I'll never get over that. And he said something that I'll never forget. He said, you just be yourself. Do what you have been doing in Memphis and Jackson before that, and people will love you. He said, L.A. is just a megalopolis of different kinds of people from all over. And he was right. And so we landed, went to the Beverly Wilshire Hotel where I stayed for the first 2 weeks. And after that first 2 weeks, I went to KHJ TV or KHJ Radio and did mornings. And that's the way I got started out here. And then by that summer, I was doing the same kind of television show that I'd been doing in Memphis, Wink Martindale Dance Party.
Mm-hmm. And well, you know, no sooner that you arrived in L.A., we've got to cover this too, something happened that would follow you for your career and for the rest of your life. You made a record for Randy Wood on Dot Records, and it was called Deck of Cards.
Yeah, I had a contract with Randy Wood at Dot from my days in Memphis, and he said, we won't be in a hurry. He was my guest on a dance party show back in Memphis, and he said, when you come to L.A., we'll find something for you to record, but we won't be in a hurry to do it. One morning I got off the air at KHJ, and I had a call from Randy Wood's secretary, and she said, Randy wants you to come up to the office. He wants to play something for you. And we were just down the street from Wallach's Music City, and Dot Records was above that. So I only had to walk about 2 city blocks. And I go up to Randy's office and walk into this plush office carpet like this, and he puts on a 78 RPM record, scratchy record by a singer named T. Texas Tyler. It was called Deck of Cards. And he said, I want you to listen to this, and I want you to tell me what you think of it. And even before you played it, I thought, well, it's a talking record. The number 1 record in the country is Mac the Knife by Bobby Darin. There's Venus by Frankie Avalon. Kids buy records. Who's going to buy a semi-religious talking record? But I was determined. When he took the needle off that scratchy 78 RPM record, I was going to say, Randy, I love it. So sure enough, I mean, I wasn't about to, Randy had a pretty good ear for what was making it in those days. I mean, he had found Pat Boone and Billy Vaughn and the Hilltoppers, and he had been extremely successful. Number 1 independent record label, bar none, in the country. And so I knew he knew what he was doing. So when he took the needle off, he said, what do you think? I said, Randy, I love it. Well, we went into a studio about 3 weeks later. Billy Vaughn did the arrangement with some background singers, and we recorded this thing called Deck of Cards. And it came out, and it just laid there. And about the middle of September, one morning, Bob Clayton, the number 1 morning man in Boston, for whatever reason, happened to put it on the turntable and play it. And the switchboard lit up. Reminded me of that night in Memphis at WHBQ, and That's All Right Mama was playing. Yeah. The switchboard lit up, and he couldn't play it enough. He played it over and over again. And it swept across the country like wildfire. And by November of that year, it was number 4 on Billboard and Cashbox. And another out-of-body experience was when we received a call in November from the Ed Sullivan Show for me to come back to New York and do it on Toast of the Town. And like I said before, I never throw anything away, and I have the introduction, I hope, by Ed Sullivan. Do you have it?
You're headed for the Ed Sullivan Show, named America's #1 variety program, starring the nationally syndicated columnist of the New York Daily News, Ed Sullivan.
Thank you. Now, here's a very attractive young fellow from Memphis, Tennessee. His name is Wink Martindale, and he has one of the top records of the season. I'm sure you've heard it on radio. So let's have a very nice hand for Wink Martindale, won't you?
I was often told that if he really likes you and what you do on his show, he'll call you over to say hello. And he called me over.
Wow.
And he said, I know your family and all your friends in Memphis are very proud of you. And I got to shake his hand. Not everybody got to do that. And I know you've all heard this recording, but I thought you might want to hear it one more time. Do we have the music for that?
Absolutely.
The year is 1959. Ike's president, Nixon's vice president. The Nash Rambler is introduced. Alaska and Hawaii become our 49th and 50th states. And the Barbie doll debuts. It's the year I record a narrative about this battle-weary GI playing with a deck of cards during a church service. I've always loved the power of the spoken word, so these words caught my imagination thanks to Randy Wood. I'd like to share it with you one more time. During the North African campaign, a group of soldier boys had been on a long hike. And they arrived in a little town in Italy called Cassino. The next morning being Sunday, several of the boys went to church. A sergeant commanded the boys in church, and after the chaplain had read the prayer, the text was taken up next. Those of the boys who had a prayer book took them out. But this one soldier had only a deck of cards, and so he spread them out. The sergeant saw the cards and said, "Soldier, put away those cards." After the service was over, the soldier was taken prisoner and brought before the provost marshal. The marshal said, "Sergeant, why have you brought this man here?" "Well, for playing cards in church, sir." "And what do you have to say for yourself, son?" "Much, sir," replied the soldier. To which the marshal said, "I hope so, for if not, I shall punish you greatly." The soldier said, "Sir, I have been on the march for about 6 days. I had neither Bible nor prayer book, but I hope to satisfy you, sir, with the purity of my intentions." And he started this story. You see, sir, when I look at the ace, it reminds me there is but one God, and the deuce reminds me the Bible is divided into two parts, the Old and the New Testaments. When I see the tray, I think of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And when I see the four, I think of the four evangelists who preached the gospel. It was Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. When I see the five, it reminds me of the 5 wise virgins who trimmed their lamps. There were 10 of them. 5 were wise and were saved. 5 were foolish and were shut out. When I see the 6, it reminds me that in 6 days, God made this great heaven and earth. When I see the 7, it reminds me that on the 7th day, God rested from his great work. And when I see the 8, I think of the 8 righteous persons God saved when he destroyed this earth. It was Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their wives. When I see the 9, I think of the lepers our Savior cleansed, and 9 of the 10 didn't even thank him. When I see the 10, I think of the 10 commandments God handed down to Moses on a tablet of stone. When I see the King, it reminds me there is but one King of heaven, God Almighty. And when I see the Queen, I think of the Blessed Virgin Mary, who is Queen of Heaven. And the jack or knave is the devil. When I count the spots on a deck of cards, I find 365, the number of days in a year. There are 52 cards, the number of weeks in a year. 4 suits, the number of weeks in a month. There are 12 picture cards, the number of months in a year. There are 13 tricks, the number of weeks in a quarter. So you see, sir, my pack of cards serves me as a Bible, an almanac, and a prayer book. The story is true, I know, for I was that soldier.
That's great. it live. I mean, I've always played that. We've all heard it on record. But to hear you perform it live was just marvelous.
Well, thank you.
It really was touching.
You know, that record has followed me my entire career. I have people to this day say, "Are you the same Wink Martindale who
Oh, yeah.
recorded that deck of cards?"
Yeah.
And my answer is always the same. Do you think there are two people walking this earth with a silly name like Wink Martindale? Yeah. In '61, after KRLA, I thought, I was wrong, but I thought that I'd had enough of rock and roll. And Randy Wood always wanted me to go to work for him and learn the A&R business. And so I decided this was the time. And I left KRLA and I went to work for Randy Wood at Dot Records as an assistant in A&R to learn that business and also be national promotion director. So I traveled around the country doing that. And while I was at Dot Records, one day, it was also my job to pick up. At that time, it seemed like everybody and his brother was making hit records in their garage. Remember those days in '62 and '63, and what was it? Kathy and the Originals, or somebody like. What was that?
Yeah.
What was that terrible record? Rosie, baby.
Rosie and the Originals.
Rosie and the Originals.
Yeah. She was from San Diego, by the way.
Yeah, well, she wasn't very good.
Well.
But anyway, that's an editorial statement.
Yeah.
We can cut that out.
Yeah.
But it was my job, if any masters came through the front door, pick them up for Dot. One day, in walks a guy with a local record that was getting some airplay, a little bit of airplay on KFWB. It was called Tell It to the Birds. And it was by a singer named Dory Alpert, D-O-R-E, Dory Alpert.
I know him well.
And he played it for me. And I knew it was getting airplay on KFWB, and I said, well, somebody must like it because it's hard to get a record on KFWB. And in those days, Channel 98, Color Radio, was #1. This was before Boss Radio, KHJ. Yeah. And so I thought, I better take this in and play it for Randy. I did. He said, buy it. I said, how much shall I give him? He said, $750. I said, okay. So I went out and I told Dory, I said, we'll pick it up, put it out on Dot nationally, and we'll pay you an advance fee of $750, which pleased him. Dory Alpert turned out to be Herbie Alpert.
Yeah, he was lying to you, man.
Yeah. Herbie Alpert later formed A&M Records with Jerry Moss.
Yep.
I saw Jerry recently at a memorial service for Russ Regan, and we remembered this story, and we both laughed about it. But they took that $750 and put it together with $1,000 that they had saved up, and they recorded a thing called The Lonely Bull. And that was the beginning of Herbie Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. And we remember, all of us remember how huge, there was nothing bigger than the Tijuana Brass in those days. And to prove the story, in case you're ever at my house, I will show you an autographed picture, which is hanging on my wall, and I'm very proud of it. It's a picture of Herbie and Jerry, and it's autographed to Wink. Without your good ear and $750, we might never have made it. I have that on the wall.
Yeah, that's
and
great.
I took a picture of it after I left Jerry that day at Russ Regan's service and sent it to him. And he didn't have that. And he got back to me in an email and told me how much he appreciated that. But that, again, that was one of those life-changing experiences almost that I was involved with, kind of like the Elvis Presley experience years before.
Now, you know who Dory Alpert is, don't you? He does exist.
No.
That's Herb Alpert's son. And he's a good friend of mine.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
Yes.
He said, I'm just good. He probably was a little baby at that time when he came in to see us. I'll say it's Dory Alpert, my son.
Tell it to the birds. Do you ever hear that?
No, I haven't. I'm sorry. I got to be honest. Hey, but listen, as we move on, it was around 1965, ladies and gentlemen, and you decided that you had had enough of rock radio, and that's when the game shows took over.
No, let me stop you there.
You know what stop me here?
Because It was while I was at Dot Records that I realized that I really wasn't tired of radio.
Oh.
And that's when Jim Hawthorne came calling.
Yeah.
And Gary Owens
Sure.
was leaving to go to KMPC, the station of the stars, to do afternoons.
Yep.
And that left the morning show open. And Jim Hawthorne
right.
asked me if I'd like to come to KFWB. And, of course, I jumped at the opportunity. Randy Wood understood. I went there. And I was there until about 64, middle of 65. And you can pick it up from there. That's when I decided once again that I wanted to do something else.
Now, you worked for the Cowboy.
Yes, I did.
I hear anybody that worked for Mr. Autry said he was wonderful.
Yeah, I had grown up listening to Melody Ranch every Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
And it was part of my early days of being truly interested in radio. I had certain shows that I would listen to. Melody Ranch was one of them, The Man in the White Hat. Another one was Mr. District Attorney, Champion of the People, Guardian of our fundamental rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it shall be my duty as District Attorney not only to prosecute to the limits of the law all persons accused of crimes perpetrated within this county, but to deliver with equal vigor the rights and privileges of all its citizens. There are days when I can't remember my name, but I can still remember that. So go figure, right, John?
Yeah. Now, Gene Autry really, he thought a lot of all of his employees.
Yes.
I know, because I've had several friends who've
Gene,
worked for him.
Gene was very hands-on. He was there every day almost,
loved
unless he
everybody,
was out
man.
of the city.
Yeah.
He had offices there, and you could go up and sit down across the desk and talk to him. I remember the day I signed my contract.
He especially loved you.
In Stan Spiro's office when Stan was general manager. And I'm sitting there signing my contract to do noon to 3 at KMPC.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Lang had been doing that period. He went back to San Francisco.
Right.
And so I took over that time period. And while I'm signing my contract, in walks the man in the white hat. And again, it was like an out-of-body experience. I jumped up, and I couldn't. He shook my hand, and he knew who I was, and he said, I just want to welcome you to the station.
Isn't that?
But that's my memory of Gene Autry. And he couldn't have been nicer. He was just one of those very, very special people.
How long were you at KMPC, by the way?
I was there total almost 12 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good time. And during that time.
I went there, left, and came back.
But during that time, that's with the game shows.
Yes.
I want to talk about your game shows.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. When I was still at KFWB, before I went to KMPC, I was addicted to a show called Password with Alan Ludden.
Right.
And I would get off the air at 9 o'clock in the morning, go downstairs to Aldo's and have breakfast with the promotion guys, and then I'd rush home to watch Password with Alan Ludden. And I did some research, and I discovered that Alan Ludden went in 2 days a week, knocked out 10 shows, and 5 days he played golf. And I thought, hell, that's not a bad way to make a buck. I said, I think I want a little piece of that. So I went to the late Noel Rubeloff, God rest his soul, my agent at the time, Abrams Rubeloff. And I said, Noel, and I told him my story. And I said, I think, I've never really thought about being a game show host, but I'd like to go on an audition for a game show. So he did. He sent me on several auditions. I didn't get the first couple, but then I got a local show on KTLA called What's the Name of That Song? And it was on every night, 5 nights a week. And their deal, the producer's deal, was with NBC, and if it made it locally and did very well locally, then NBC would put it on the air. That's when daytime was comprised of a lot of different game shows.
Sure.
And sure enough, it made it locally, got on the air on NBC, and that was my first network game show called What's This Song? They had to shorten What's the Name of That Song down to What's This Song so it would fit in TV Guide, believe it or not. And some, the guys in New York make the big bucks by making the big decisions, right? Michael Brockman, you know this to be true. And they decided that Wink Martindale, somebody in New York, I think it was Bob Aaron, decided that Wink Martindale sounded too juvenile.
What?
And they said, what we'll do is knock off the K and he'll be Win Martindale.
Oh.
So for that first show, I did What's This Song starring Win Martindale. I remember Steve Bailey was the announcer. And when we first started, I would be waiting in the wings to come out and say hello. It was sort of a name that tune type of show, but called What's This Song? And Steve Bailey would say, now, here's the star of our show, Win Martindale. And I'd look around and say, who the hell's he talking about? Oh, I said, that's me. I got to go out there. So that was my first show. Only lasted a year, but it got me launched into game shows.
Okay, now, from What's This Song, you went on to host and produce 21 game shows. We're talking about Gambit, Tic-Tac-Toe, Dream Girl 67. We had the Headline Chasers, High Rollers, Trivial Pursuit, Debt, just to name a few. I mean, there were so many. Can you tell us your personal favorite, Wink?
Well, I think for a lot of different reasons, my personal favorite would have to be Tic-Tac-Toe.
Okay.
The main reason being, it was nice to get a regular check every week. And it was on, I did it for almost 8 years. And it became a huge success in prime access time period. That was before we had 250 different channels. And every night, Tic-Tac-Toe was usually combined with Joker's Wild in that 7 to 8 o'clock time period. And it became enormously, enormously successful. And that is the show that I would have to point out as being my own personal favorite, although I loved some other shows, like High Rollers with the Big Dice.
Sure.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I love Gambit, the Blackjack game,
Right.
from Heater Quigley. So there are a lot of different shows. Let me tell you about, I'll tell you a funny story, and then I'll tell you a serious story about Tic-Tac-Toe.
All right.
Every fall, we did an over 80s tournament where all the players were over the age of 80. And I was doing interviews with the contestants. Dr. Reba Kelly was 88 years old, and she was a widower. And I said, Dr. Kelly, at your advanced age, do you still think about dating at all? And she looked at me, and without batting an eye, and I'm sure that Mark Maxwell Smith or Dan Enright or Jack Barry gave her this answer. But man, she didn't blink an eye. She said, yes, Wink, I have 4 boyfriends. I said, really? She said, yes, I get up in the morning with Will Power. I take a walk with Arthur Itis. I come home with Charlie Horse, and I go to bed at night with Ben Gay.
Do you have any memories of when you did Tic-Tac-Toe? And I mean, that was a wonderful one. But if you have another one,
this is a more serious story. Sandy and I were attending. Let me preface this by saying, when you talk into that red light on that camera, no matter what kind of show you're doing, you do not know who you're reaching out there and in what way. And this story proves it. We were at a charitable function at the Universal Hilton Hotel. This was about 2005 or 6. And it was during the auction period before the evening started, before we went in for dinner, silent auction. And I had a guy tap me on the shoulder. And I looked around. He said, Mr. Martindale. I said, no, Wink. He said, okay, Wink. I just want to say hello to you for my brother. My brother loved your show more than any other show on television. He loved the trivia aspect of your show, and he never missed it. I said, really? He said, yeah, he was in the Navy. He was a lieutenant in the Navy stationed in San Diego, and he used to come up every weekend for tapings at CBS. And it finally got to the point, he said, where taping the shows and just watching wasn't enough. He wanted to be on the show. So he came up midweek, went to Century City to the Barry and Enright offices, took the test, played the game, and got on the show. And I sensed that it was so important to him that perhaps he would like those episodes on which he starred, on which he was a contestant. And I said, I think I can get them for him. He said, no, he's no longer with us. I said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. And it turns out his brother was Chick Burlingame, pilot of American Airlines Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon on 9/11. I still get emotional when I tell the story. But that's why I said at the outset that when you do a show, whether it's a game show or a dramatic show or you're doing a movie or whatever, you never know how what you're saying and what you're doing affects those people out there. And those are the two stories that always come to my mind when people talk to me about tic-tac-toe.
I've heard those stories before and absolutely love them. By the way, something else that we love at the Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters, because the Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters is our club. It really is. I love the luncheons, and I'm so happy that Chuck Street put together these coffee withs. And, you know, one of the standout people at those luncheons are you and Sandy. We love seeing you guys.
Well,
really.
thank you. Thank you.
And I really mean that. When we go to a luncheon, when I see you and Sandy, I go, all right, everything's going to be cool. Yeah. Anyway, before wrapping it up, and I hate to wrap it up, this coffee session, because we're having so much fun.
Well, we don't know. There's a
fun?
Dodger game this afternoon, too.
Anyway, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to share another recording that you made recently entitled I Stand for Everyone. Now, it's an example of the power of the spoken word. It's a narrative that some people say is even better than deck of cards. And you performed it recently on the Governor Mike Huckabee TBN show, which I thought that was a great show. In fact, I think he's restarted it. But I understand that you're going to perform it at Mar-a-Lago in February. Mm-hmm. Yeah, is that right?
And next week at the Reagan Library during an event that I'm hosting.
Oh, that's great. I want to be there for that.
Yeah.
I really. So can we hear it?
This narrative was written by a songwriter named Paul Hampton. He's written a lot of hits over the years, such as Sea of Heartbreak for Don Gibson. You may remember that. You Don't Know What You've Got Till You Lose It for Al Donner back in the 60s, and many others, some with lyricist Hal David. In my mind, these lines to this narration are an inspiring patriotic anthem to help all of us see the world, ourselves, humanity, and our place in it just a little bit better. It's non-political and yet strongly patriotic, somewhat like Lee Greenwood's God Bless the USA. It's become an opening theme at political rallies. This is I Stand for Everyone. Every day I hear my Father's voice say, the footprints we make are the stands that we take to bring our country together. I am the flag of our country. This is truly who I am. And when you pledge allegiance to me, remember the things for which I stand. I stand in reverence to the power above me. Stand for the underdog whose dream comes true. I stand to honor a great performance. Stand in awe of love in bloom. I stand for that kind of ambition that's a blessing and a curse. I stand for speaking strictly from the heart, for better or worse. But first, I stand for those whose time was spent before they could spend their time. I stand for everyone who lost their place in line. Oh, I stand for kissing and a whole lot of hugging. Stand for the would-have-beens, had they just held on. I stand for givers who know no limits. Stand in hope when hope is gone. I stand for the things you won't say when you don't want to hurt a friend. I stand for living life as it will never end. But first, I stand for us who put our trust in the hands of God's design. I stand for everyone who lost their place in line. Oh, I stand for everyone who's felt the turn of the screw, for those who know rejection is just another point of view. I've saved a place in line for everybody still tracing their dreams, or so it seems. I stand for the bold and the daring who spun out on Dead Man's Curve. I stand in lieu of everybody who deserves to be heard. But first, I stand for those whose time was spent before they could spend their time. I stand for everyone. I stand for everyone. I stand for everyone who lost their place in line.
All right. You know, at one of our marvelous Pacific Pioneer broadcast luncheons, Wink Martindale came up to me at my table and he said, "Shotgun, I would like you to interview me at the Coffee With." And it was an honor for you to ask me that. I really appreciate it. It meant a lot to me.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you being here. And I want to thank all of you for being here today. It's really nice of you to give up your Saturday morning. And Wayne Newton used to say a couple of things at the end of his show, and I'd like to repeat them for each of you here today. He said, when you take of a man's money, you've simply taken a part of his wealth. But when you've taken of a person's time, you've taken a part of his life. And I thank you for your time. And finally, Wayne used to say, it really doesn't matter how it ends for me. All that matters are the hearts and minds we touch along the way. God bless you all. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Okay, folks. Don't forget to pick up your copy of Winking at Life by Wink Martindale. They're available here before you leave.
Yeah, because I got to
today.
pay my mortgage this month.
I know. Hey, listen, you signed my book. You can't have this one, but we have more in the back. And by the way, we're going to be having more Coffee Withs. And keep looking at your Pacific Pioneer Broadcasting newsletters. I'm sure you'll find out more about that. Also, when you come to our luncheons, we have flyers around on the table that will tell you who our next Coffee With will be. Ladies and gentlemen, Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters, thanks you for coming. And we'll do this again. You better believe it, baby. Thanks a lot.